Thanks for joining us. I'm Nancy Furness, and this is We've Got Issues. And we are filming on location at Coquitlam City Centre Library, and we'd just like to thank the library for providing a venue for our interviews. Before we get started, I want to acknowledge that our interview today is taking place on the traditional, ancestral, and unceded territory of Coquitlam First Nation. So we thank the Coquitlam who continue to live on these lands and to care for the lands and the waters and all that lies above and below. Joining me today is Grayson Barke. Grayson is a Coquitlam resident. He is a student in environmental science at SFU, and he's also a member of the Tri-Cities Urban Forest Working Group, also called TCUF. So thank you so much for joining us today, Grayson.
Happy to be here.
So just to start off, I am with you on the Tri-Cities Urban Forest Working Group, and I'm wondering if you could just maybe start us off by telling us who TCUF is and what the goal of that group is.
Sorry, I'm just making sure my phone is off so we don't get any interruptions. It's an important conversation.
Always
Happy
a
to
good
be
way
here.
to start
yes.
off. Yeah.
So TCUF is small, organic, grass-fed, grassroots movement. It's really just a couple of Coquitlam residents, one of whom was sort of deeply affected by loss of trees on her property, kind of unintentional loss of trees. A neighboring property was being redeveloped. Trees were removed there, and that made the trees on her property unsafe. And so they unfortunately had to come down as well. And to be honest, I don't remember what the initial conversations were. It was a couple of years ago now, but I do remember meeting during the heat dome in her backyard to sort of have a ceremony before the trees came down. And that's really where, sort of all of us gathered there recognized the importance of this conversation, talking about, going forward as, heat domes become a regular thing. What are we going to do next time? How do we protect ourselves, our homes, our communities, from heat?
No, and it's especially hard to see trees come down when you don't want them to come down.
Absolutely.
Like we see enough, we're losing enough of them. What is the goal of the TCUF group?
So, the goal really, protect Coquitlam's urban forest. We, see this as sort of critical infrastructure. It's one of the most important tools we have to manage heat and to manage water and flooding. And we got the sense, a deep sense, and worry and concern that urban forests aren't being managed in our region in a way that, to ensure that they're going to be there, today and tomorrow. And more importantly, being enhanced, putting trees in places where they're really helping keep people cool.
Can we just maybe back up just one step and
Absolutely.
Tell us what is the urban forest? Like, are we just talking about trees, or is it more than trees? And also, why is it so important that we retain a healthy urban forest?
So normally when we're talking about the urban forest, it's mostly trees, but really it's sort of all vegetation. Trees are the big part. That's what we look at when we take a top-down view. That's what's creating the shade and the majority of the cooling. But trees, they don't do well on their own. They need that supporting vegetation, the undergrowth.
Part of a community.
Right. So, parks as well. Basically everything that's not concrete and man-made.
So it includes private backyards?
Private backyards, public parks, the little verges along the sidewalk, street trees, just about everything. And the reason why we want to think about everything, every plant is performing photosynthesis, evapotranspiration. So, little bush, great big tree, both of them are working. It's hot out like this, as long as there's water in the soil, they're helping cool our community.
So evapotranspiration, they're drawing that water up
Yes,
from the soil,
that's
and
right.
It's coming out and evaporating and cooling the air.
That's right. Just like sort of putting a fan, a
a
wet towel
mister.
in front of your fan. Yeah, or putting, misting yourself and then sitting in front of a fan.
What other things does the urban forest do for us or for habitat and things like that?
Another important function is in process of photosynthesis, some of that light energy is getting converted into sugar, into food for the plants, before it has a chance to turn into heat and sort of heating up your community. So they're sucking up that a little bit of that light energy as well. So it's heat management, it's also flood management. So if you think about, if you have a tree, you've got soil beneath it. The tree intercepts something like 50% of the rain that falls on it. And then the roots and everything sort of make it easier for the rain to infiltrate into the ground and go into the groundwater, move downstream to the river and eventually to the ocean.
So the tree kind of breaks the rain falling, lets it fall more gently, and then it can seep into the ground?
Exactly.
Okay.
And so if you think about removing a tree and putting pavement down, you've got a double whammy. Now 100% of that rain is hitting impermeable surface and is having to go into gray infrastructure, so man-made storm sewers and things like that. And we've just seen in Toronto,
yes, we have.
There are limits to what man-made structures can do, both in terms of cooling and in terms of flood management.
Well, even here locally in the Tri-Cities, we've seen around sort of IKEA area, when we get those heavy rains,
Absolutely.
It's just, it overwhelms everything and we get localized flooding. There's just nowhere for that water to go.
So you're sort of faced with a choice as a community. Do you build massively more infrastructure to intercept all this water, or do you start taking a look at maybe how we can use the natural environment to help us out with some of this?
Green infrastructure already in place.
Yeah.
Okay. No, that's interesting. Thank you for giving us that little description. It gives us kind of a better idea of what we're talking about when we say the urban forest.
That's right.
So you're saying heat cools down our hot cities, there's stormwater management, and we do see heat domes, we see atmospheric rivers, so we are dealing directly with those issues right now. Also things like mental health. Aren't trees good for us?
Of course.
Just to be around.
So if you have trees managing sort of the heat and the flooding, there's going to be less anxiety about that. Your basement's not flooded. We sort of get lost in the numbers. So many houses were affected, but for an individual whose basement is just flooded, like somebody in Toronto, that's probably 6 months of their next year is upended.
Well, it costs money, it's time, it's grief,
it's everything. And we're seeing the insurance industry sort of adapt. They're adapting to these changes, and people are finding insurance more expensive, or in some areas, maybe not so much in Canada, but in the States, they're not able to get insurance.
We're starting to see that, yes, which is a very unsettling sort of place to be. If you can't get insurance for your home, you could be in trouble.
That's sort of one way trees can sort of improve your mental health by reducing that kind of stress about your home. But even in a day-to-day, they reduce air pollution, noise pollution, give you a bit more privacy. And I think most people have sort of heard of forest bathing now.
Yes.
Just the idea that being out in trees and green space helps your body, helps your health, helps your mental health.
Well, we've been hearing this 330, 300. Can you tell us what that's about, or maybe just tell us how much green space do we need?
That's an excellent question, and it's going to be a little bit different for every community. And I think one of the things we hear over and over in urban forest planning is the right tree in the right space. But there are some sort of bigger targets that have been developed, through the universities, through urban planning schools. 40% is one we hear a lot in
for canopy coverage.
Canopy cover in North America. So that's when you're taking and they can do this with lasers now. When you're taking a top-down picture of your community, they can measure, what's hitting the ground and what's hitting a tree, and so that's how they come up with a measure of canopy cover. So 40% is the level where you're starting to see a lot of these benefits from cooling, flood management, and at 40% you can also expect most people to have pretty good volume of trees around where they live. And so that goes into the 330-300, which is a little bit of a different way of looking at it. So rather than just saying we want a 40% canopy average across our community, we want everyone to have sort of 3 trees that they can see from their bedroom window.
So 3 big trees.
3 big trees,
yeah.
Substantial trees they can see from their bedroom window or their front door. The 30 is, hang on. I don't have all this rattling around in my head. I do have to look it up sometimes as well.
And I think Cecil Kaneinendijk, who did this, has actually come out to the Tri-Cities and spoken to us about the 330-300. So.
It's a really good thing to remember. Sometimes I have to go back and look at the details. So here the 30 is 30%, so a little bit lower,
yeah.
But I think what they're saying here is it should be 30% in every neighborhood, every street, every block, minimum. 40% across the whole region, and that would be sort of including your parks.
Right.
But 30% should be the minimum for your street or your block.
Right.
And then the 300 is green space. So you should be able to walk to a green space, so 300 meters.
Right. Yeah. How are we doing in the Tri-Cities? Are we meeting our 330-300 or our 40% minimum?
Well, it's complicated. I think
it's always complicated.
It is complicated. In our region right now, there's sort of a lot of good things happening at the municipal level and through Metro Vancouver at the regional level. We actually have a lot of plans in place on paper, right, to meet the 40%, meet the 330-300 targets.
So the the desire is there.
Yes, this is sort of well understood and something that's desired and that we're striving for in both municipal government and regional government. Unfortunately, Metro Vancouver does measure this, and they've just released an analysis this year, and they said most communities are, unfortunately, they're losing.
We're going in the wrong direction.
We're going in the wrong direction in most places. So the city of Vancouver is one of the outliers. They've gone up a little bit. They recognized about a decade ago that they were in that sort of perpetual decline, and they needed to make some sort of major changes in how they were doing things, and so they've gained a little bit.
Because it's easy to lose, but it's much more difficult to actually grow.
It is, and this is probably the one real downside of trees is that they take a long time to grow. If we could speed that up, this would be much easier for us to do.
Or maybe retain what we have and
retain what we have
so quickly.
Well, yeah, if you could speed them up, maybe removing them wouldn't be so bad. But as it is, you don't want to be losing it because it can take decades to replace a mature tree and its benefits.
So Vancouver's doing reasonably well. How about the Tri-Cities?
So unfortunately, Coquitlam, on this chart that Metro Vancouver produced showing who's gained and who's lost, Coquitlam was the biggest loser, and it was estimated we've lost about 7%. So we were doing well. We were at that magic 40%. I mean, anyone who lives here know we've got a lot of parks. We've got the mountains, the green spaces up there.
And I know there's some really good work going on in Coquitlam right now with developing an urban forest management plan. And so there is some good work going on, but why are we losing? Is it development or? It's
a lack of a holistic approach. This hasn't been a priority. So I said, the city of Vancouver put this front and center in their sort of redevelopment plans. I mean, it's a new government there today. Things may change, but they really put this front and center. And so did the city of New West as well. They were also starting
They went up, didn't they?
They did.
From a very low canopy coverage too.
So both those communities said, it's basically whenever you're looking at a piece of land to redevelop, you say, what kind of green infrastructure is there today? What trees, what vegetation, what parks, if there's lawn, green space, how much of that can we keep? Because, keeping is easier than replacing.
Right.
And then how can we design, new buildings, new streets to make sure that, that's making these changes and taking away, it's adding to our canopy. And they, one of the ways to get the most benefit out of this, making this a priority in your planning is to look at your community and see where are the fewest trees.
Oh, so you're talking about some equity.
Yeah.
So areas that don't have as many trees, you're prioritizing them maybe?
That's right. So you can take your canopy map, you can see where there's trees, where there's not. You can take a heat map of the city on a day like this and see where are the really hot spaces.
Where are those really hot spaces usually? What kind of neighborhoods?
So it's typically your sort of urban core.
Right.
It could be, thoroughfares, so big sort of connector roads.
Mm-hmm. Maybe
and then
vulnerable, lower income.
As well, there tends to be correlation, so that's another layer they can add to this sort of planning exercise is demographic information. And you get a really sort of, down to the block level, down to the property level, look at where trees are needed.
And I would think with our increasingly hot summers that it might be of real importance to have trees planted in those more vulnerable or low income communities, right? As a way
Absolutely.
to try and cool them down a little bit.
Unfortunately, those can be some of the most challenging areas to make those gains, to offset some of those losses, because once you have that built infrastructure, the pavement and the concrete, you've lost a place to put a tree. Trees need sufficient soil to support them. They need the space, and trees, the right kind of tree can do well on its own, sort of as a street tree, but you're not going to be planting like a red cedar in the middle of a hot downtown anymore. Right. It just won't survive.
So you're talking about challenges of planting trees. We're dealing with concrete, hot surfaces, sort of unfriendly environments, inhospitable environments for trees. What other challenges are we facing? I know there's new housing legislation that's been mandated by the province. Is that affecting our urban forest or is it presenting new challenges to us?
So this has been a bit of a curveball, and it's something our group, Tri-Cities Urban Forest Working Group, has been working on since the housing legislation was announced. This is bills 44, 46, and 47, I think. Where they were announced in November. So our group has been working, mostly focused on the Tri-Cities, Coquitlam, Port Moody, Port Coquitlam, trying to make sure that, our little corner here, yes, our little neck of the woods, because these things don't happen in isolation, we want to make sure that the Tri-Cities have good urban forest management strategies. It's wonderful here. I mean, everybody who comes here says it's beautiful. A lot of that has to do with the trees and green space, the parks, exactly.
So fortunate to have.
We'd organized a forum. We invited sort of experts. Brian Minter came to speak, and this was a chance for the public and municipal employees to come and listen to some experts about.
I believe there were lots of city staff.
That's right.
Yeah.
And that was our second forum, and I think the days leading up is when the province announced these housing bills, and so there's this funny duality. We've kind of reached the end of the road. Coquitlam, our community, has they've agreed to develop an urban forest management strategy. So we were thinking of this forum as a little bit of a celebration. And in the days leading up to it, I remember reading over the provincial housing legislation. And I remember just doing a simple keyword search. And I'm looking for trees, I'm looking for green space, I'm looking for human health, I'm looking for climate change, climate adaptation, flood management. I'm looking to see if all of that knowledge that exists in our region, North America, about urban forests, climate adaptation, how has that been incorporated into this housing bill, which is coming into every community in BC over 5,000. So this is a massive change.
Maybe just say that this housing legislation mandates minimum density requirements, according to how close something is to transit or any community over a population of 5,000. So
that's right.
It's expansive.
It is, yeah.
And it's mandatory.
It is, and there's a key piece of language in there, and it is municipalities, so whatever planning they're doing, whatever bylaws they have, they're not allowed to unduly restrict these new density requirements.
So that's basically saying, go ahead and have your tree bylaws, but these density requirements sort of supersede.
That's right, and
your
that is the structure of government in BC. The municipalities are creatures of the province, and so if there's a conflict between a municipal and a provincial bylaw, the province overrides always. So I mean, what we've done is we're sort of surprised by this, and not just us, other people in the sort of working on urban forests. I know
municipal level,
academics. I know Catherine Barris, head of the BC Landscape Association, Coastal Health, Vancouver Coastal Health,
even Canadian Medical
Association. They've all sort of had a look at this and said, there's some pretty big gaps in your housing plan. Like, how can you create complete communities that support human health, that people find attractive and want to live in, that have all those benefits that trees provide.
Where's our climate resilient housing?
Well, I mean that yes, there's a Ministry for Climate Readiness and Adaptation, and it doesn't appear that there's any conversation between what they're doing and the housing strategy.
So the communication is going up and down, but not.
I mean, I don't know. It's a bit of a black box to me. I mean, we've tried to sort of meet with the housing minister or some environment minister, some of the key people behind this.
So there's been conversations. Is there an awareness that there's a gap?
So our local MLAs that we've gone to see, they readily acknowledge that there's a gap, and sort of this isn't what's intended. We're not intending to come in and sort of take down all the trees and put up.
So the intent was to address a housing crisis.
Yes, but you can't do these things in isolation. I mean, we live on a landscape. It's a forested landscape.
We're all connected.
We live in a watershed. You can't, just sort of take a white sheet of paper and say, I would like this many housing units in this area because there's transit there. I mean, I see what they're trying to do, but if you move ahead without considering what I think is essential, parks, trees, green space, you're not going to end up with a result that people are happy with.
So what is TCUF doing? Like, what are the actions going forward, and how can people get involved if they'd like to learn more about this?
I mean, our group is pretty small. We do have a mail list. It's tcurbanforest@gmail.com. So TC Urban Forest, all one word. You can find us on Facebook, just under Protect Coquitlam's Urban Forest. And if you go on YouTube, you can find the recordings of the first forums we held, as well as our interview with Isabel Gordon, talking about natural asset management. Which
Isabel Gordon is with West Vancouver.
The District of West Vancouver.
One of the first people to bring natural assets management home to this region, I believe.
That's right. So it's really a way to talk about, trees, urban forest management within the context of municipal infrastructure, the same way they do, roads, sewers, power lines, and things like that.
And maybe that's the direction we need to go, to have our complete community, so that we're considering this as we develop and not as an afterthought or separately.
And that's sort of one of the top tips I would have for anybody looking at these issues is, take that holistic approach. And I'm just trying to see where it is here. Yeah, I mean, either or, it's not. You can't really go ahead. You have to do both.
Right,
yeah.
Right. No, Grayson, I'd just like to thank you so much for coming in and talking to us about this today. It's an important issue, something that's going to affect us more and more as our climate continues to change. And thank you for your good work and the good work of your group. And we hope that people will connect and stay engaged on this, and hopefully we can find a better way forward. So thank you so much.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Thanks for joining us this afternoon. I've been speaking with Grayson Barke, who is a member of the Tri-Cities Urban Forest Working Group, and he's been talking to us about the urban forest and how and why we need to retain a healthy urban forest.